You're in a fight. Emotions are high and it feels hard and it feels messy. And maybe the fight started over something small. And maybe it started over something you thought would just be a quick conversation. But now their face changes and their tone shifts. And then they say it. They say something like, maybe we should just break up. Or something like, I don't even know why I stay. Or something like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And just like that, in that very instant, your whole nervous system flips. Your stomach drops, your throat tightens, your chest gets hot, and your thoughts, they just go blank. And that argument you were having, or that issue you were discussing, or whatever you were actually trying to work through, it just disappears in that moment. It's completely gone. Because now what happened is that you're in survival mode. And your brain is no longer thinking, how do I resolve this fight? It now is thinking, how can I stop them from leaving me? It's thinking, what did I do wrong? And it's thinking something like, what do I need to say to make them stay? And maybe this isn't the first time it's happened. And maybe this happens every time you and your partner fight. And maybe it's not even loud anymore. Maybe it's a subtle sigh or a muttered saying something like, whatever, I'm over this. Or maybe it's just silence and a door slam. But the impact that it has on you, maybe that stays consistent and maybe that's the same every single time. Maybe you freeze, you panic, maybe even collapse. And maybe for you, the most confusing part is that you just start apologizing. Even when you didn't do something wrong, you just start begging. And maybe you even start saying things that feel humiliating to you the next day. Because for you, the pain of them leaving feels worse than the pain of you losing yourself. So what happens is that you start to chase. And that chase is not emotional manipulation, but that chase is what happens when conflict for you triggers an abandonment wound. And if you're saying, oh my gosh, that sounds just like me in my situation, or if that hit you something deep in your chest, it's because this is the cycle that you're oh so familiar with. So I want you to know, if this is you, you are not alone. And today we're going there. And I'm gonna walk with you the whole entire way. So what really happens to your body, to your mind, when someone threatens to leave during a fight or during a disagreement, or even they threaten to leave during a conversation that you just felt like was a normal conversation? Let's talk about that. Because on the surface, it might just sound like a blow up. But beneath the surface, there's often a cycle happening. And it's a cycle that's hard to see when you're in that cycle. But here's what I want you to hear. A threat to leave is not just a communication issue. It's a nervous system issue. And it's not just about the words being said. It's about what those words are doing to your body. Because what happens is it's activating a primal fear inside of you, a survival instinct. And most of the time, you don't even know that you've shifted into survival mode, because that shift happens so fast. Because one minute you're just grounded, and the next minute your body feels like a child again. A child begging your caregiver not to leave, not to pull away, and not to reject you. And in that moment, that abandonment wound doesn't just say, hey, my partner is upset. What that abandonment wound says to you is, I'm not safe. It says that love is leaving. And it says something like, I am too much again. And because of that, that shift in your body happens so quickly. So what does living in this type of cycle actually look like? Well, here's what I see all the time in session. You get into a fight, and maybe it's about a plan or a boundary or a need that isn't being met. So because of this, you try to start a conversation, and maybe you try to be vulnerable in that conversation. But then what happens is your partner goes cold, or they go sharp, or they go dramatic, and they end up saying something like, that's why I don't talk to you, or I'm not dealing with this, I'm done, or if you don't change, I can't do this anymore. And in that moment, it feels like your body just breaks into pieces, because all you were trying to do was have a conversation. So suddenly you're no longer thinking about that conversation or that boundary you were trying to put into place, and you're no longer standing in your truth. Now what you're doing is you're chasing. You're chasing them down emotionally. So then you start backpedaling. And do you end up saying things like, I didn't mean it like that? Or I'm sorry, I'll fix it. Or please just talk to me. And later, maybe hours later, you start to wonder, why did I collapse like that? Why did I feel so helpless in that moment? Why did I feel like if they left that I would die? I want you to know, if you felt like this, that's not weakness. That's a trauma response. And that's your nervous system reliving a time when love was unstable for you, where love was inconsistent or conditional. And so now let's just take a moment to flip perspectives. Why do people threaten to leave? Why is saying, I'm done, such a common go-to when people are feeling overwhelmed? Let's just break it down in a moment without blame. Sometimes, yes, people threaten to leave because they're trying to manipulate you and because they're manipulative people. And they do this because they learn that manipulation gives them power. They know that it makes you panic. And they use that power and that panic to make you shut down or to gain control or to avoid accountability. But there are other times when people threaten to leave, not because they're manipulative people, but because they never learned to stay. They never learned how to stay grounded in conflict. And because they never learned how to do this, they don't know how to stay grounded in conflict. And sometimes they threaten to leave because they never learned how to manage emotional discomfort. And because they never learned this, they don't know how to manage emotional discomfort. And sometimes they threaten to leave because they don't know how to sit in vulnerability without feeling exposed or feeling unsafe. So they don't do it. So what do they do instead? They reach for the most powerful tool that they know. They reach for withdrawal, abandonment, and silence. And they say, I'll leave, not because they don't care, but because they feel so out of control and they're trying to get control over their own feelings. So they're scared, they're flooded, and they're full of shame. And shame doesn't know how to repair. Shame only knows how to run. So what do? They run or they threaten to run. But here's the thing. I'm scared, so I push you away might explain the behavior, but it doesn't make it safe for you. And it doesn't mean that you have to tolerate the behavior. And it doesn't mean that your nervous system isn't being harmed from the behavior. And it doesn't mean that your inner child isn't being re-traumatized every time someone uses leaving or the threat to leave as a weapon. And understanding why someone does something should never be a reason to stay where you're hurting. So let's pause for a second, because what I need you to understand is this. When someone threatens to leave during a fight, your nervous system doesn't just hear, we're in a disagreement. What it does hear is that you're about to be left. And if you have a history of emotional neglect, where your caregivers were inconsistent, conditional, or chaotic, or emotionally unavailable, and if you feel like love had to be earned, or begged for, or never quite reached, then that threat of leaving doesn't feel like a fight. What it does feel like is abandonment trauma round 2. And because of that, your body responds. So in this type of situation, what your body does is your heart rate spikes. Your breathing becomes shallow. Blood leaves from the front of your brain, which is the thinking part of your brain, and moves into the survival system. And then what happens is you lose access to complex reasoning, to self-trust, and to boundary holding. And you can shift into a fawn, which is a people-pleasing type of response, where your body starts saying things like, I'll be whoever you need me to be, just don't leave me. And because of this, you might find yourself begging, apologizing for things that you didn't do, or just shutting down completely. And in that moment, you're not being dramatic. You are not needy, and you are not weak. You are just responding to a nervous system that has been taught that conflict leads to abandonment, and abandonment leads to emotional death. So you're doing exactly what your younger self had to do to survive a world where emotional safety for you was not guaranteed. And emotional safety is a need. So if emotional safety wasn't guaranteed to you as a child, imagine how that would impact you as an adult. So one impact from that lack of emotional safety is the development of trauma responses. And what a trauma response is how your body and mind reacts to a perceived threat. And what I mean by a perceived threat is that your body and mind believes or what it takes as a threat. It doesn't mean that you're actually in danger. Your body and mind is just interpreting the situation as the fact that you are in danger or there's a threat of danger. So it's reacting to that threat, to that perceived thought. So let's talk a little bit about trauma responses, because trauma responses play a huge role when you're in the middle of a conflict. So when your partner says, I'm done, or maybe we shouldn't be together, you're likely not choosing how to respond, because your nervous system is making that choice for you. Because your nervous system is the body's control and communication network. So it controls many aspects of what you think, how you feel, and what your body does. So here's what it can look like when you are in conflict and your nervous system is responding. It can look like entering into a fight type of response, where you raise your voice, you try to argue back, and you defend yourself fiercely, because leaving feels like a threat that you have to fight off. It can look like entering into a flight type of response, where you shut down, you mentally check out, and you start planning your escape even if you're not ready to leave, or you just emotionally evacuate. It can also look like entering into a freeze type of response, where you go blank, you stare, you can't think, you don't know what to say or do, so you say or do nothing. It can also look like entering into a fawn type of response, where you start pleasing, you apologize, you say whatever you need to say to get them to stay, and you lose your truth in order to keep their love. And many people think they're bad at conflict when really, they've never been taught what safety looks like during conflict. So you are not emotionally immature. You're just emotionally unprotected. And when someone uses threats of leaving in conflict, they are activating every one of these trauma responses in your body. Sometimes they're activating all of them at once. And that's not miscommunication, that's emotional chaos. So here's what I want to get really clear. If your partner comes back and they say, well, I was just upset, or that's how I talk when I'm angry, or I didn't mean it, all of that might be true, but saying something hurtful in the heat of the moment does not erase the impact that it had on you. Just like stepping on someone's foot might have been an accident, but it didn't stop for the bruise from coming. So this isn't just about what they meant. It's about what it does or did to your body. And when threatening to leave becomes a pattern, not a one-time altercation, but a repeated part of how they show emotion or gain control, that's not just dysregulation. That's a relational safety issue. So here's the line. Feeling overwhelmed in a fight is normal, and accidentally saying something hurtful in a moment of reactivity is human. But when someone consistently uses leaving as a threat to shut you down or to punish you or to get their way, that's not just human, that's not just an accident, that is emotional blackmail. And I know that's a really strong word, but I use it with purpose because emotional blackmail doesn't have to sound explosive. It can be soft and it can be subtle and it can be disguised as I just need some space or I'm done trying. But if the underlying message is, if you don't give me what I want emotionally, I'll punish you by withdrawing, rejecting, or abandoning you, that's not communication, that's control. And that's them trying to control you. So let's name the red flags clearly, because sometimes they're hard to see when you're in them. So here are some signs that the person is trying to use emotional blackmail tactics. One sign is that they threaten to leave every time there's tension, because it's their default, their go-to, and even small disagreements spiral into breakup threats. Another sign is that they withdraw affection or connection when you express a need. So you speak up and they pull away, either emotionally or physically. Another sign is that they punish you with silence or distance or hostility when you don't agree with them. And this can last for hours, days, or even weeks. Another sign is that they say things like, I can't do this anymore, every time you set a boundary. And what they're trying to do is make your needs feel like the cause of their pain. Another sign is that they minimize your feelings and maximize your reactions. So you express hurt and they call you crazy. You cry, so they roll their eyes. Another sign is that they flip the script. So suddenly you're apologizing for making them feel like leaving, even though you were the one hurt to start with. Another sign is that they never take accountability after threatening to leave. They never say things like, I scared you, or that wasn't okay. They just tend to kind of brush it off. So if any of these things are happening in your relationship, I want you to hear this. You are not the problem. You are just in a dynamic that's conditioning you to believe that love is earned through self-neglect. And that's not love. That's survival mode disguised in connection. And I promise you, there's a different way to do relationships. There's a healthier way to do relationships. But it starts by telling yourself the truth. You have to be honest with yourself. So I want you to pause here and say something to your inner child. Because I know this pattern didn't start with your current partner. This pattern started when you were little. When people who were supposed to love you, those people withdrew when you cried. They yelled when you had needs. They pulled away when you were honest. They threatened to leave or actually did leave when you showed emotion. And maybe they didn't say the words out loud. Maybe they didn't say, I'll leave. But their behavior said it every single time they shut down, or every time they left the room, or looked at you like you were too much. So you learned, if I upset people, they'll go away. If I'm emotional, I'll get punished. If I need too much, then love disappears. But you were never too much. They were just under-equipped. They didn't know how to hold your feelings because they didn't even know how to hold their own feelings. And now what's happening, and the reason that you're still in this cycle, is because you're reenacting the same story in your adult life, but trying to rewrite the ending and trying to finally be enough to make someone stay. But here's the truth. You were never the reason they left. You were never the reason they shut down. You were never the cause of abandonment. You were just a kid trying to be loved. And now, as an adult, you're allowed to say, I will not abandon myself to avoid someone else from abandoning me. And that's the shift, that's the work, and that's what real healing feels like. I do want to make something really clear. Not every conflict altercation is a red flag. Sometimes people do say hurtful things when they're dysregulated, and sometimes we speak from our wounds and not our hearts, and sometimes we mess up. We are human beings, and that is a part of being a human. So if someone you love threatens to leave once in the heat of an argument, in the heat of a fight, and then they immediately recognize that it was damaging, and they take real accountability for that, and they made a real commitment to do better, and then they follow through on that commitment and on changing that pattern, then what you're witnessing is an actual disagreement. And disagreements are human, but what matters is the repair. But when threatening to leave becomes a pattern, then that's not dysregulation. That's emotional blackmail. And if the repair only happens when you beg for it, or when you apologize first, or when you let it go for the sake of peace, then that's not repair. That's bullying. And that's control dressed in the language of conflict resolution. And threatening to leave during fights isn't just a poor communication skill. It's disconnection in the attachment system. It's an echo of early abandonment wounds, yours and theirs. And while it helps us to understand the behavior, it never excuses the harm. And understanding isn't the same as accepting. And compassion isn't the same as staying. You can hold empathy and still hold your boundaries. You can still see the wounded child in them and still protect the healed adult in you. And this isn't demonizing your partner. This is about deprogramming your trauma. And it's about learning that you're allowed to feel secure in love, without fear, without punishment, without begging, and without bracing yourself for the next time they say, I'm done. Because from now on, you get to decide when the story ends. Not your fear, not their threat, but you get to make that decision. So go make it.